I've got Victory in Europe, which is the Columbia game that came out this year, 2015, and it is a pretty epic World War II game with tons of blocks and a lot of really cool things going on. The game is, to me, it sort of reminds me in a way of Axis and Allies, and I've got very fond memories of Axis and Allies from when I was in middle school, maybe my first year or two in high school. I used to play with a friend of mine, and we had the first version of the Axis and Allies game that came out, and we played that quite a few times. And Axis and Allies is a good maybe 6-hour type of game. Covers the entire war, and we had a great time playing it. And this sort of maybe reminds me of that scale of Axis and Allies, but I really think that this system is so much better than the Axis and Allies system. Now, I haven't played the newer versions of the Axis and Allies system, and I know they've probably done a lot to bring that game along over time, but I've really enjoyed this game so far. Now, if you're familiar with Columbia games, it has a lot of similarities in how it plays. You have your typical system here with the blocks, where you have the number which represents the strength of the block, and as the block takes hits, it decreases until it gets to 0, and then it comes off the board. You have your numbers up here which represent the order that it's going to fire in, where the blocks with A's go first, and it's always the defender shoots first in that section, and then the attacker, then the B's, then the C's, then the D's. And the number at the very end of it represents, which is a 3 here, what score on a die roll that you're going to hit. So in this case, I'm going to also roll the number of dice equal to the strength. So I'm going to roll 4 dice because I'm at strength 4. I'm going to roll them in the D part of the battle, and I'll score a hit on a 1, 2, or 3. Also on the block, it signals the amount of movement the unit has, which is here, and the cost to build the unit. And when the unit gets depleted, you can spend points to build the unit back up. I think, this game has a pretty large scale to it, which I like. And just kind of give you an idea of, a lot of Columbia games are sort of very focused, and they're games that you can play in a couple of hours. This game here is going to go longer, but it's got that scale piece to it that some of the other Columbia games don't have. And I haven't played the Eastern Front games, which is another World War II, but I think that's got a pretty epic scale to it as well. So the game itself can be played as a 3-player game or a 2-player game. If you play it as a 3-player game, you have one player is controlling the western part of the Allies, and then you have a player playing the Soviet Union and another player playing the Axis powers, which would be Germany and Italy. One of the cool things about the game is that it is designed to be open-ended and not really a scripted version of the war. So from turn 1 of the game, you can sort of take any direction you want in the war. Germany, when they set up the board, I've set this up for the 1939 version, most of the blocks have specific, for the Allied powers, most of the blocks go in specific places, but Germany gets to place most of the blocks wherever they want. So they can place them in a way to maybe go after Poland first and then maybe just directly take on the Soviet Union, or they can place them maybe more to take on, whoops, I shouldn't have that unit up in Denmark, that's a neutral country. They can maybe position better to take on France. Maybe they want to take France down first. So there's no scripted way that you can go about this. So there's a lot of options, and that's one of the things I like about it, is that it's not scripted. Now, one of the other neat things about this game, which I really like, is there are blocks that I have not put out on the board, and I've got them down here on this grid here. These blocks here represent the neutral countries. And if you look at the board, all the areas that don't have blocks right now are probably neutral countries. There's a lot of, like, for example, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Romania, Turkey, Spain, Sweden, Norway, Finland. Those are all countries that have their own armies. And they start the game neutral. There is a phase in the game, and it's towards the end. You start with a card phase, a movement, combat, supply, a diplomacy phase, and then production. In the diplomacy phase, what you do is you roll a dice, you pick a country, and you roll dice, and it's modified by this table here. And if you roll one of these amounts here, you can pull in that country to your side. Now, for the Axis powers, there are certain countries that are easier for them to pull in. Like Hungary is pretty easy to pull in. Romania is very easy to pull in to your side. And so, at the end of every phase, there might be some potential to pull in some of these armies for these countries. And it's pretty common for Germany to be able to pull in Romania. And when you do that, those armies go out onto the board and you get control of those to help you in the game. And I think that diplomacy phase is really cool because it can play out pretty differently each game that you play. And it's definitely not scripted. You don't know, some games, Finland might come in on the Axis side, which is a big help for them, or sometimes it can come in on the Allies side. So, and that can change how you're playing the game as it goes on. And I think that's a really neat aspect of the game. I really like that diplomacy phase, and that's something that Axis and Allies doesn't have, and I think that's a really neat part of this game. It also has an economic part of the game, and I do not have everything set up for this 39. I have not put out the factories, but I'll zoom in on this sheet here. There are factories that you put out on the board, and I just haven't done it. But these are the factories. I'll show you. And these go out on the board in the different areas on the board. And you also have resources too, which are represented by some of these squares that have triangles on them, and I'll zoom in to show you here. So let's see here. Okay, yeah, Romania's got a triangle here too. These are resources. So you're going to keep track of your resources and your factories. And the lower amount between those two represents how many build points you're going to have in your production line. So you're going to be having to build factories and trying to conquer countries to get resources to increase your industrial power. And as you're doing that, you're going to have more build points, your armies are going to get stronger, and so forth. Which I think is a pretty cool aspect of the game too. So you have to manage that and protect your factories and your territories too, because if you lose those, you're going to lose your economic power and your economic base. Another factor of the game are these cards. And what happens is, in 39, if you're playing the 39 scenario, you're starting out with 2 cards. There's only 2 turns in the 39 scenario. Normally there are 4 turns in a year representing the different seasons. And the cards come out and they're random. So you're not going to get all of the 39 cards. You're just going to get 2 of the 39 cards. And for the Allies, you can see that here's 1940. They have a whole selection of 1940, and you'll get 4 of those. And some of them have special, a lot of them have special one-time abilities on them, or there's just a whole bunch of different things that some of these cards do that sort of either bend the rules or make exceptions for those turns, which can give you a little bit of an edge. So, for example, this one is Blitzkrieg. Your armor gets +1 firepower in 1 battle, which can really give you an edge on one battle. So you have to plan when to play those cards out. The other thing is that the numbers represent points that you can use to either start battles or redeploy units around the board. And so you're limited by that number. Usually the higher the number the better, but there are times when you might want the other player to go first, so you might not want the initiative sometimes during the game. But usually the higher the number the better. It gives you more options, more battles you can start, more armies you can move around. So if you're going to move around an army in a game, you just need to be able to trace a supply back to London. If you are playing the Allies, you need to trace your supply back. So, like for example, if I could take this unit here, and since all of these areas here are neutral or controlled by me, I could actually redeploy a unit back here. And actually, there's a couple exceptions here too. These anchors allow you to deploy all the way around Africa if you wanted to. So even if the Mediterranean gets cut off, you can actually redeploy here and supply these areas back through Africa. But anyways, so you can use one of those command points. I think they're called command points as far as the terminology goes. Command points. So you can take a unit and redeploy it all the way over here using one of those command points. They are very precious in that regard. So even though that's a very powerful move, it takes up an entire command point just to move one unit using that. The other way to move units is just by their basic movement. But if you can use their basic movement, you've got to be a lot closer to where you want it to go. It would take forever for it to get all the way across the map without using one of your command points to do that. So supply is fairly forgiving in this game. It's usually pretty easy to trace supply back to your capital or to one of your alternate routes. There's an alternate routes that you can trace back if some of your supplies are cut off. It's fairly forgiving, and I kind of like that. But there are serious consequences to getting cut off, and you might think that because of the way supply works and how forgiving it is, you'll never have units cut off from supply. That's actually not true at all. You still have to be very careful, because one of the neat things that happened in a game that I played, we played the 43 scenario. Anyways, in that scenario we had units that were already starting out here in Russia somewhere. But anyways, what happened was, as the game was going on, what happened was my units were sort of spread out like this. I was playing Germany, and I left a little bit of a pocket in the middle. And the Soviets came in and attacked the pocket. And then what I was able to do was surround that pocket with some troops and cut off their supply. And when your units are cut off from supply, they lose a step at the end of the round. So there are some really interesting tactics that can happen when you move out into areas. You have to be careful that you don't form, you want to move into the enemy territories, but you also got to be careful that you protect in the rear, your rear areas too, so that you don't get cut off from supply. So even though the supply is fairly forgiving, I think it works well because you can still get surrounded, you can still get cut off. from supply, and that sort of thing works pretty well in the game. The battles are pretty typical of the Columbia system, where you have units that enter an area, they're going to fight. Other units during the movement phase could move into the area and act as reinforcements, and reinforcements will come in a turn later, as is typical of the Columbia system. And you roll dice, and combat only goes for 2 rounds. And I really actually like that a lot, because it puts some pressure on you. If you don't finish combat in the 2 rounds, you have to withdraw. Now there's exceptions to that, which makes, I'll show you what the exceptions are. It's if you have a general, and find one of these generals here somewhere on the board. Where's my general? Oh, here it is. Here's one of the generals. Generals can extend battles. You reduce them a step, and you can extend the battle for 1 round. At the end of that round, you can also reduce them again and extend the battle another round. So generals are very powerful if you really want to finish off an area that you have just invaded. If you have a general, you're going to be able to extend the battle, and it's much more likely you're going to be able to finish off your opponent. If you didn't have a general, you're taking more of a risk, because the combat's going to end after 2 rounds, and you might not be able to hold the ground that you're moving into. Another thing that I like about the engine for the game is, after you win a battle, if you have a general there, you can reduce a general 1 step, and you can blitz into an adjacent territory and start a new battle in that territory, which is kind of neat. So it represents some of those World War II tactics there, where the motorized units were able to advance, and the armored units were able to break through and move very quickly once they got through a line. So I think that's a pretty cool aspect of the game. So you can move into an area, fight a battle, finish the battle, blitz into another area, and start a battle there, which is pretty cool. I like that part of the game. There's a whole section of rules for landings, and the Allied powers are probably going to at some point do a landing into France or Italy or somewhere in Germany. And they can do an amphibious landing, and there's a set of rules for those. Amphibious landings can be difficult to do, which they should be. It takes a lot of, you have to be organized, you have to control the sea zone and things like that. And you can do some landings, which I think is pretty cool too. The main thing I can say about the game is I've had a lot of fun playing it. After finishing the game, it's been one of those games that I've been kind of thinking about after I play, which that's always a good sign for me. When you're thinking about, okay, what might I do differently? How would I play it a second time? Maybe I would try a completely different strategy, that sort of thing. I think that's always a positive sign for me, when a game makes me think after I played it, and it kind of bounces around in my head for a while after I played with it. Kind of sticks with you, and then you want to play it again. As soon as you have an opportunity to play it again. And this is what this game has done for me. So I think overall the game has been pretty successful at capturing that sort of flavor of World War II, a lot of the aspects of World War II, capturing that grand scale of the war, and done it in a way that is fairly simple enough to learn. There are a lot of aspects of the game that you kind of have to get your head around to be good at it, like the supply and how to do landings and the economic piece of it. But I think it all works well together to capture a neat flavor, a neat storyline for the war. And it seems The open-endedness of it, I think, is really cool because there's so many different directions you can go with it, and the war can really unfold in a completely different way each time you play. Like the neutral powers are going to join different countries each time you play. You could completely, the Soviet Union, for example, they might decide, hey, we're just going to go attack Germany early, maybe right in 1939, and forget about the reinforcements from Ural and just trying to hold out till 1942. Germany might go directly after France and try to knock them out right away, or they might go directly at the Soviets, maybe in a different game. The Allied powers, maybe they might try to land in Italy and take Italy out early, or maybe they just try to concentrate and reinforce the French and try to help the French hold out as long as possible against the German army. It's just really neat how it can really unfold in different ways, and that's probably one of my favorite parts of the game, is you're not really locked into, you can do almost anything in the game. But so overall I've had a good time with it. There are some things about the game that I know people have had some grumblings about, and I will talk about that. One of the grumblings is the size of the map. The map plays fine the way that it is. It's fine. And would a larger map have been better? Sure. A larger map would have been cooler and better, but the game plays fine on the map that it is. So I don't think that is a huge major concern. The original version of the rules, I think there are some parts of the rules that people felt were unclear, and I think with some good reason that some of the rules felt unclear. But the good positive is there's a 1.1 version of the rules available on Columbia right now, which I think clears up a lot of it. So, that's my ramblings. It's an excellent game, covers a lot of the aspects of the war. It's open-ended. It lets you sort of create maybe an alternate narrative for the war, which I think is really cool, how that whole system can work. It tells a nice story. So, victory in Europe.